The Witch's Husband. My grandfather has misplaced his words again. He is trying to find my name in the kaleidoscope of images that his mind has become. His face brightens like a child's who has just remembered his lesson. He points to me and says my mother's name. I smile back and kiss him on the cheek. It doesn't matter what names he remembers anymore. Every day he is more confused, his memory slipping back a little further in time. Today he has no grandchildren yet. Tomorrow he will be a young man courting my grandmother again, quoting bits of poetry to her. In months to come, he will begin calling her Mama. I've traveled to Puerto Rico at my mother's request to help her deal with the old people. My grandfather is physically healthy, but his dementia is severe. My grandmother's heart is making odd sounds again in her chest, yet she insists on taking care of the old man at home herself. She will not give up her house, though she has been warned that her heart might fail in her sleep without proper monitoring, that is, a nursing home or relative's care. Her response is typical of her famous obstinacy. Bueno, she says, I will die in my own bed. I'm now at her house, waiting for my opportunity to talk sense into her. As a college teacher in the United States, I am supposed to represent the voice of logic. I have been called in to convince La Abuela, the family's proud matriarch, to step down, to allow her children to take care of her before she kills herself with work. I spent years at her house as a child, but have lived in the United States for most of my life. I learned to love and respect this strong woman, who with 5 children of her own had found a way to help many others. She was a legend in the pueblo for having more foster children than anyone else. I've spoken with people my mother's age who told me that they had spent up to a year at Abuela's house during emergencies and hard times. It seems extraordinary that a woman would willingly take on such obligations, and frankly, I'm a bit appalled at what I have begun to think of as the martyr complex in Puerto Rican women, that is, the idea that self-sacrifice is a woman's lot and her privilege. A good woman is defined by how much suffering and mothering she can do in one lifetime. Abuela is an all-time champion in my eyes. Her life has been entirely devoted to others. Not content to bring up 2 sons and 3 daughters as the Depression raged on, followed by the war that took one of her sons, she had also taken on other people's burdens. This had been the usual pattern, with one exception that I knew of. The year that Abuela spent in New York, apparently undergoing some kind of treatment for her heart, while she was still a young woman. My mother was 5 or 6 years old, and there were 3 other children who had been born by that time. They were given into the care of Abuela's sister Delia. The 2 women traded places for the year. Abuela went to live in her sister's apartment in New York City, while the younger woman took over Abuela's duties in the house in Puerto Rico. Grandfather was a shadowy figure in the background during that period. My mother doesn't say much about what went on during that year, only that her mother was sick and away for months. Grandfather seemed absent too, since he worked all the time. Though they missed Abuela, they were well taken care of. I'm sitting on a rocking chair on the porch of her house. She is facing me from a hammock she made when her first baby was born. My mother was rocked on that hammock. I was rocked on that hammock. When I brought my daughter as a baby to Abuela's house, she was held in Abuela's sun-browned arms, my porcelain pink baby, and rocked to a peaceful sleep on that hammock. She sits there and smiles as the breeze of a tropical November brings the scent of her roses and her herbs to us. She's proud of her garden. In front of the house she grows flowers and lush trailing plants. In the back, where the mango tree gives shade, she has an herb garden. From this patch of weedy-looking plants came all the remedies of my childhood, for anything from a sore throat to menstrual cramps. Abuela had a recipe for every pain that one could dream up. She brought it to your bed in her own hands, smelling of the earth. For a moment I am content to sit in her comforting presence. She is rotund now, a small-boned, brown-skinned earth mother with a big heart and a temper to match. My grandfather comes to stand at the screen door. He has forgotten how the latch works. He pulls at the knob and moans softly, rattling it. With some effort, Abuela goes down from the hammock. She opens the door, gently guiding the old man to a chair at the end of the porch. There he begins anew, his constant search for the words he needs. He tries various combinations, but they don't work as language. Abuela pats his hands, motions for me to follow her into the house. We sit down at opposite ends of her sofa. She apologizes to me as if for a misbehaving child. "He'll quiet down," she says. "He does not like to be ignored." I take a deep breath in preparation for my big lecture to grandmother. This is the time to tell her that she has to give up trying to run this house and take care of others at her age. One of her daughters is prepared to take her in. Grandfather is to be sent to a nursing home. Before I can say anything, Abuela says, "Mi amor, would you like to hear a story?" I smile, surprised at her offer. These are the same words that stopped me in my tracks as a child, even in the middle of a tantrum. Abuela could always entrance me with one of her tales. I nod. Yes, my sermon can wait a little longer, I think. Let me tell you an old, old story I heard when I was a little girl. There was once a man who became worried and suspicious when he noticed that his wife disappeared from their bed every night for long periods of time. Wanting to find out what she was doing before confronting her, the man decided to stay awake at night and keep guard. For hours he watched her every movement through half-closed eyelids, with his ears perked up like those of a burro. Then, just about midnight, when the night was as dark as the bottom of a cauldron, he felt his wife slipping out of bed. He saw her go to the wardrobe and take out a jar and a little paintbrush. She stood naked by the window, and when the church bell struck 12, she began to paint her entire body with the paintbrush, dipping it into the jar. As the bells tolled the hour, she whispered these words: "I don't believe in the church or in God or in the Virgin Mary." As soon as this was spoken, she rose from the ground and flew into the night like a bird. Astounded, the man decided not to say anything to his wife the next day, but to try to find out where she went. The following night, the man pretended to sleep, waited until she had again performed her little ceremony and flown away. Then he repeated her actions exactly. He soon found himself flying after her. Approaching a palace, he saw many other women circling the roof, taking turns going down the chimney. After the last had descended, he slid down the dark hole that led to the castle's bodega, where food and wine were stored. He hid himself behind some casks of wine and watched the women greet each other. The witches, for that's what they were the wives of his neighbors and friends. But he at first had trouble recognizing them, for like his wife, they were all naked. With much merriment they began to take meats and cheeses that hung from the bodega's rafters, and laid a table for a feast. They drank the fine wines right from the bottles, like men in a cantina, and danced wildly to eerie music from invisible instruments. They spoke to each other in a language he did not understand, words that sounded like a cat whose tail has been stepped on. Still horrible as their speech was, the food they prepared smelled delicious. Cautiously placing himself in the shadows near one of the witches, he extended his hand for a plate. He was given a steaming dish of stewed tongue. Hungrily, I took a bite. It was tasteless. The other witches had apparently noticed the same thing, because they sent one of the younger ones to find some salt. But when the young witch came back into the room with the salt shaker in her hand, the man forgot himself and exclaimed, "Thank God, the salt is here." On hearing God's name, all the witches took flight immediately, leaving the man completely alone in the darkened cellar. He tried the spell for flight that had brought him there, but it didn't work. It was no longer midnight, and it was obviously the wrong incantation for going up a chimney. He tried all night to get out of the place, which had been left in shambles by the witches, but it was locked up as tight as heaven is to a sinner. Finally, he fell asleep from exhaustion and slept until dawn, when he heard footsteps approaching. When he saw the heavy door being pushed open, he hid himself behind a cask of wine. A man in rich clothes walked in, followed by several servants. They were all armed with heavy sticks, as if out to kill someone. When the man lit his torch and saw the chaos in the cellar, broken bottles strewn on the floor, meats and cheeses half-eaten and tossed everywhere, he cried out in such a rage that the man hiding behind the wine cask closed his eyes and committed his soul to God. The owner of the castle ordered his servants to search the whole bodega, every inch of it, until they discovered how vandals had entered his home. It was a matter of minutes before they discovered the witch's husband, curled up like a stray dog and worse, painted the color of a vampire bat, and without a stitch of clothing. They had dragged him to the center of the room and beat him with their sticks until the poor man thought his bones had been pulverized and that he would have to be poured into his grave. When the castle's owner said that he thought that the wretch had learned his lessons, the servants tossed him naked onto the road. The man was so sore that he slept right there on the public camino, oblivious to the stares and insults of all who passed. When he wakened in the middle of the night and found himself naked, dirty, bloody, and miles from home, he swore to himself right then and there that he would never, for anything in the world, follow his wife on her nightly journeys again. Colorin, Colorado, Abuela claps her hands 3 times, chanting the childhood rhyme for ending a story. Este cuento se acabado. She smiles at me, shifting her position on the sofa to be able to watch grandfather muttering to himself on the porch. I remember those eyes on me when I was a small child. Their movements seemed to be triggered by a child's actions, like those holograms of the Holy Mother that were popular with Catholics a few years ago. You couldn't get away from their mesmerizing gaze. "Will you tell me about your year in New York, Abuela?" I surprised myself with the question. But suddenly I need to know about Abuela's last year. It has to be another good story. She looks intently at me before she answers. Her eyes are my eyes, same dark brown, almond-shaped, the lids drooping a little. Called by some bedroom eyes, to others they are a sign of a cunning nature. "Are you looking at me that way?" is a question I am often asked. "I wanted to leave home," she says calmly, as though she had been expecting the question from me all along. "You mean abandon your family?" I'm really taken aback by her words. "Yes, Hija, that is exactly what I mean. Abandon them, never to return." "Why?" "I was tired. I was young and pretty, full of energy and dreams." She smiles as grandfather breaks into song, standing by himself on the porch. A woman passing by with a baby in her arms waves at him. Grandfather sings louder. Something about a man going into his exile because the woman he loves has rejected him. Finishes the song on a long note and continues to stand in the middle of the tiled porch as if listening for applause. He bows. Abuela shakes her head, smiling a little, as if amused by his antics. Then she finishes her sentence. Restless, bored, 4 children and a husband all demanding more and more from me. So you left the children with your sister and went to New York, I say, trying to keep the mixed emotions I feel out of my voice. I look at the serene old woman in front of me and cannot believe that she once left 4 children and a loving husband to go live alone in a faraway country. I had left him once before, but he found me and came back home, but on the condition that he never follow me anywhere again. Told him the next time I would not return. She is silent, apparently falling deep into thought. You were really never sick, I said, although I am afraid she will not resume her story, but I want to know more about this woman whose life, I thought, was an open book. I was sick at heart, and he knew it, she says, keeping her eyes on grandfather, who is standing as still as a marble statue on the porch. He seems to be listening intently for something. The year in New York was his idea. He saw how unhappy I was. He knew I needed to taste freedom. He paid my sister Delia to come take the children. He also sublet her apartment for me, though he had to take a second job to do it. He gave me money and told me to go. What did you do that year in New York? I'm both stunned, fascinated by Abuela's revelation. I worked as a seamstress in a fancy dress shop and, pues, Isha, she smiles at me, as if I should know some things without being told. I lived. Why did you come back? I ask. Because I love him, she says, and I missed my children. He is scratching at the door. Like a small child, he has traced the sound of Abuela's voice back to her. She lets him in, guiding him gently by the hand. Then she eases him down on his favorite rocking chair. He begins to nod. Soon he will be sound asleep, comforted by her proximity, secure in his familiar surroundings. I wonder how long it will take him to revert to infantilism. The doctors say he's physically healthy and may live for many years. But his memory, verbal skills, and ability to control his biological functions will deteriorate rapidly. He may end his days bedridden, perhaps comatose. My eyes fill with tears as I look at the lined face of this beautiful and gentle old man. I am in awe of the generosity of spirit that allowed him to give a year of freedom to the woman he loved, not knowing whether she would ever return. Abuela has seen my tears, moves over on the sofa to sit near me. She slips an arm around my waist and pulls me close. She kisses my wet cheek. Then she whispers softly into my ear. And in time, the husband either began forgetting that he had seen her turn into a witch, or believed that he had just dreamed it. She takes my face into her hands. I'm going to take care of your grandfather until one of us dies. I promised him when I came back that I would never leave home again unless he asked me to. He never did. He never asked any questions. I hear my mother's car pull into the driveway. She will wait for me there. I will have to admit that I failed in my mission. I will argue Abuela's case without revealing her secret. As far as everyone is concerned, she went away to recover from problems with her heart. That part is true in both versions of the story. At the door, she gives me the traditional blessing, adding with a wink, Colorin, Colorado. My grandfather, hearing her voice, smiles in his sleep.